Hey everyone, welcome to Azam Shah Weekly. And yes, I know that you are eager to start this mini course on core data, but I just wanted to let you know that this mini course is part of my core data bootcamp course, which is a much detailed dive into core data framework. And this course is now available right now with promotions. So you can see right in the video the actual coupon code that you can apply to save 50% off. Now, I'm not going to take that much time. I'm just going to show you all the awesome content that is available in this course, data management with core data, setting up budget categories. So you're going to learn about one-to-many relationship, many-to-many relationship, filtering, dynamic filtering, migrations, updating expensive child context, iCloud integration, and even transformable types. So if you want to learn all of that cool stuff and get started with core data and integrating core data in your application, then this course is for you. Now the coupons are limited, so make sure that you utilize that. Again, this is a core data bootcamp, and the video that you're about to watch, the mini core data, is a small part of the core data bootcamp, which is a much extensive course. Thank you so much. Let's go back to the core data mini course. Let's go ahead and take a look at the application that we'll be building in this section. So this will be a simple to-do list application, which will allow you to add items to the pending state as well as the completed state. So let me go ahead and add something. So I'm just going to say feed the cat, and you can see that that particular item is added to the pending list. Now I'm going to say feed the rabbit, and then we'll say clean the car. Let's go ahead and say that clean the car is done. So I can check mark this, and you can see that it has moved to the completed items. If I uncheck that, it moves back to the pending items. I can even go ahead and change the text. So this is all editable. So I can go and edit this out, and I can say, don't feed the cat, but feed the dog. And I can also mark things for deletion. So once it's deleted, it's deleted. I can go and say feed the rabbit. Now, once the item is marked for completed, I cannot edit this, unlike the pending items, which I can edit, but the completed items I cannot edit unless I make them again editable by moving them into the pending list. Let's go ahead and add another item. We'll say clean the house. We'll say clean the house is done, and you can also delete it. All right. So this is the application that we'll be building using SwiftUI and core data. Let's learn about data management with core data by creating a simple to-do list application. You can already see that I've created a basic SwiftUI project. In order to get started with core data, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add a model. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a new template. And in the template, I'm going to select the data model. And you can see that this is under the section core data, which indicates that these things are related to core data. And the data model is going to allow you to specify different records along with their properties that you want to store in SQLite using core data framework. So let's go ahead and add that. You can call your model anything you want. I'm just going to go ahead and call this to-do model, but you can call this anything you want. Let's create that. Great. So this is the model designer, the data model designer, as you can see. You can always use the add entity to add a new model. So right now we just want to store a to-do item. So I'm just going to go ahead and add an entity, and an entity will be added. You can see right there. Now, I don't really like to name my entity. I mean, I want to represent it with the real world. So let's go ahead and rename this to to-do item. So this means that this particular entity is going to be representing a single to-do item. In the attributes section, you can see that it's completely blank. There's nothing there. Since this is our first exposure to core data with SwiftUI, I'm going to start really slow and just going to add a couple of different properties over here. So let's add an attribute property, same thing. The title. So this means that this will be the title for the to-do item, like mow the lawn, feed the cat, things like that. The second thing is the type, what data type it will be. So I'm just going to go ahead and select string over here. Great. And if you open up the properties window, you can see since I have selected this attribute called title, I can see all of these different properties related to the title attribute. And one of them is saying optional. This means that the title is optional. Now, we don't really want the title to be optional, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that part. Because title for a to-do item is required. Let's go ahead and add another attribute. And I'm going to call this attribute is completed, whether your task or to-do item is completed or not. Now, it's completed, we're going to have only two values, if it's completed or not, true or false. So let's go ahead and select Boolean. And again, we don't really want this to be an optional. I mean, this is a required thing that you have to provide. So I'm going to make sure it's not optional. And for the default value, we will put no. This means that the task is not completed. So if you create a new to-do item, the default value of its completed will be false or no. And let's go ahead and build it. Okay, it's building. Great. Now, one other thing I want to point out is if I click on the entity, which I'm doing right now, you can see that the properties window has now changed. And one of the things that is really interesting over here is the option for code generation. The code generation simply means right now it's selected to class definition, but you have a couple of different options over here also. So manual or none, which basically means that no class will be generated for you, and you will have to do the work of creating a class in Swift to represent the to-do item. Class definition means that the class will be created for you, and then, so everything will be done for you. I mean, a class will be created, and that class will have two properties representing its completed and title. The last option is category or extension. Category is coming from the Objective-C background, and extension, obviously, we're talking about Swift extension. So category or extension simply means that you will be able to provide properties or additional stuff in the way of adding it to the extension. So since we're just starting out, we're just going to select class definition and make sure it is class definition. This means that the Xcode will write or create a class for you. So the class will be called exactly with the same name, which was to do item, and it will contain different properties like its completed and title. So all of that work will be done by Xcode or for you, or core data will do the work. You don't have to go and create that particular class. So this is great. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we are setting up the core data stack correctly. Right now, we have created our to-do item, but we still have to make sure that our core data stack is set up correctly so we can interact with the core data. So that is what we'll be doing in the next lecture. Now let's go ahead and implement core data provider that will be responsible for setting up the core data stack. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new group, and I'll call this providers. And inside this provider, I'm just going to add a new file. We'll call it a Swift file. That's fine. And we'll call it core data provider. Now, keep in mind that when we're setting up the core data provider, we want to set up the provider which will work with our production code as well as the preview. All right, so you'll see it's a little bit different to set up for the preview also. So the first thing I'm going to do is import core data. That's a framework, that's a module that we want to import. So let's go ahead and import that. And then we can go ahead and create a class called Core Data Provider. Now inside the Core Data Provider class, we're going to go ahead and create persistent container, which is basically NS persistent container. And the container will have access to the context. Now currently it's complaining because we don't really have any initializer for the Core Data Provider to initialize persistent container. Not to worry, because we can go ahead and create initializer. And since we also want to accommodate for the previews, and for the previews we want to use in-memory provider, we can go ahead and pass in memory, which is simply a Boolean flag, and by default it will be false. So this means that you can create it by passing a normal or calling an initializer without passing anything, and the default value for the in-memory will be false. Now inside over here, we are going to initialize persistent container using NS persistent container, and we're going to pass in the name of the model. And this is basically the model file. So whatever the name of your model file is, just pass it over there. So let's go ahead and pass it, call it to do model. Okay, great. If is in memory, if the person or if the user is saying in memory, in memory, like this, then we will set up the persistent container to be a little bit different. And what you can do is you can say persistent container dot persistent descriptions dot first dot URL. And I know it's a kind of like a weird way to set this up, but this is taken from, Apple documentation. And what they say is just set the file URL with path, which is this one, and just set it up to be something. So I'm just going to copy that line and we can simply paste it over here. There we go. All right. So basically file URL with path, and you set it to dev/null. And this is going to allow you to create a in-memory container. Now, in-memory container or in-memory persistent container simply means that it's going to persist information. Like if you're saving a to-do item, it is going to save it in the memory. So when you run the application again, it will not be there. All right. Next up, we're going to call persistent container.load persistent stores. This is going to give you the description, which we're kind of ignoring right now. We don't really want to do anything. And it's going to give us error. Now, if there is an error, we're going to unwrap this. And then, well, if there's an error, there's not really much you can do at that point. We can simply say that core data has failed to initialize, and we'll just move forward with something else. So there's not really much we can do about that. Okay. Now, another thing that you can also add in the core data provider is you can add a view context. So if you want, so you can create a property called view context, and which is manage object context. And whatever the persistent container is going to give you the view context. All right. So it will be much easier to just use view context instead of saying core data provider dot persistent container dot view context. It's kind of up to you. This is kind of like just a helper property that I'm creating. And the final thing that we want to do is set up for previews. So for previews, I'm going to say static var preview, and this is going to give us the core data provider. So inside over here, we're going to set up the preview, meaning a provider that is for the preview. Okay. And inside of here, we're going to create a new provider using core data provider. And in memory, since we're creating this for the preview, now we can go ahead and pass in true. We can also create the view context, which is provider.context, and we can return it. We return the provider. Now, one of the things that you really need to be focused on over here is when you're using previews, it tries to load the store first. And if the store doesn't have any idea about, different things, different entities, then the store will break. So one of the things you can do at this point is to add some dummy data, dummy to-do items into the in-memory database. This means that when you run the application, you will have access to those items always, for previews, obviously. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and run a loop for index in, and just going to add like a couple of different items, let's say 10 items. It doesn't really matter what the items are. They will all be to-do items. So I'll create a to-do item, and you'll see that you have access to the class called to-do item. Now, if you're wondering, well, hold on a second, where is this to-do item class came from? I mean, I never created this to-do item class. So where is this coming from? Well, if we go back to the to-do model, which we did last time in the last lecture, and if I click on the entity over here, you will see that the code generation option is set to class definition. This means that you are asking Xcode to create the class for you, which will be based on the to-do item entity. All right. So that is what happened, is the to-do item entity that you created behind the scene. Xcode was able to create a class for you. And that is the same class that we're using over here. So I'm going to say to-do item. I'm going to pass in the context, which in this case is view context. And just going to set the title, to-do item.title. Now, one of the things that you will note over here is that title is string optional. But if you go back to to-do model and click on the title, you said that it's not optional. So why is this creating as optional versus not optional? And this goes back to how core data was implemented in Objective-C and how things are actually stored in the database. So to accommodate for those things, it is always making sure that yes, in the database, those things are not really allowed. Like you do have to provide some sort of a title, but the mapping that comes from the Objective-C and core data is that you have to provide a nullable field over here. All right. And this will be very important when you're also making sure that your core data is synced with CloudKit or iCloud in the future. So let's go ahead and assign something over here. I'm going to say to-do item, and just give it a number, like we can just pass in the index over here. Now, all of these items are created using the view context. So this means that they're already part of the context. We just have to make sure that we persist the context, meaning save the context. So view context.save. And the save function you can see over here is going to throw an exception. So we have to make sure that we catch that. So here we go, try, catch, and then we will print out stuff. Like if there's a problem, we're just going to catch it, we're going to print it out. And this is how it looks like. This is how our core data provider, which is responsible for setting up the core data stack, looks like. And it does come with a preview property, which we will be using just for the previews. All right. And when we are running the preview, we will see that by default, it will have 10 items, 10 to-do items will already been added. Now, one of the things that you will see about this to-do item is we set the title property, but there is another property over here, which is completed, which we never set. And the reason is that the is completed property does have a default value of false. So if we go to the to-do model and you click on the is completed, you can see that it's not really optional, but it does have a default value of no, which means that the default value of false. Now let's go back. So this is our implementation for the core data provider. And the next lecture, we'll be covering how we can create a to-do item and how we can save a to-do item in the database. If you're using the previews, then I'll show you how you can set up the previews and save it in the in-memory storage. All right, so let's go and find it out in the next lecture. Now that we have created the core data provider, which is going to set up the core data stack, our next step is to create and save the to-do item. For that, we're going to jump into our content view. Now, in the content view, you can already see that the interface is pretty much all the Swift UI code that is written is by default. So we haven't really written anything in our Swift UI code. So let's go ahead and start with that. The first thing I want to do is to capture the text, meaning the title of the to-do item. And in order to capture that, I'm going to go ahead and create a state field. So I'll say state private var title string like this. Next, we can go ahead and add a text field with rounded border so we can actually see the text field. So let's remove this code from the VStack and replace it with a text field. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and see what's going on over here. There we go. Hopefully our Xcode previews are eventually going to catch up, but at least we have a text field over here. When we submit text field, meaning whenever the person writes something in the text field and they press the return key, then the onSubmit is going to get fired. Now, inside the onSubmit, we need to first check that if the text that you're writing in the text field, is it correct or not? Meaning you're not leaving it empty. So I'm going to go over here and create is form valid. There we go. Title dot is white space. Now over here we don't really have any extension which is called white space. Don't worry about it. Let's go ahead and implement that. I'm just going to go ahead and add a new group, extensions, and we're just going to go ahead and extend string. So I'm just going to mark the extension string plus extensions. And in the extensions, I'm simply going to add the extension that I'm trying to perform. There we go. All right. Now let's go back to our code. And hopefully now it's going to pick up is empty or white space, so it's not going to complain that. Let's go ahead and see what's going on with our Xcode previews. Hopefully it's going to be able to load correctly. All right, so here we go. We have our text field. Finally, our Xcode preview is working. Took a while. So the first thing we need to do is we need access to our manage object context. Now, if you remember correctly, in the providers, we created the core data provider. And inside the core data provider, we also created for the preview. Now, this particular preview provider is going to be used when we are working for Xcode previews. And we can use in-memory model if we want to. So what in-memory model is going to do is when you save something, it's going to be saved in the memory. So when the Xcode preview is going to launch again, you will not really have that data. So all that data will be gone. Now, if you want to use a real persistent storage, that's fine too. But for over here, I just want to show you that how you can even use the different kind of a model. All right. So in this case, we have the content view. And on the content view, we can add environment. And one of the environment key path values is the manage object context. For the manage object context, we do have to provide the view context or the manage object context, which we can get from core data provider .preview.view context. So this particular context that we are providing is only for the preview. Now, inside our content view, if we want to access that manage object context, then we can get it from the environment. So we're going to say environment, manage object context, private var, and then the context. So this is going to give us the context from the environment value manage object context. So we will have access to the context. All right. The next thing we want to do is we want to save, right? So let's go over here to our submit button. And first we can check if is form valid. If the form is valid, Then I'll say save to do item. Now keep in mind that first of all, we don't really have save to do item. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that we're just going to implement the save to do item inside the view itself. Eventually, in the much bigger app, I'm going to show you that how you can move all this logic into your core data models so that you can also test it out and reuse that functionality. So let me go ahead and create save to do item. So if you're building much larger applications, probably this approach will not be good. And the reason is that if you have any logic, like domain logic that you want to execute, then I would not put the domain logic over here because it will be very hard to test it out and it will be very hard to reuse it. All right. Now, if you're building a simple app like to-do list that we're doing, it's perfectly fine. I mean, it's just a demo project so that it will keep you going with core data. So save to do item, the first thing we're going to do is create an instance of the to do item, and you can see that in the to do item, we can pass in the context, which we already have. So the context is we got it from the environment, and we can pass that context to the to do item to create a to do item. Next, I can go ahead and say to do item.title equals to the title. So this title is the one that whenever you type something in the text field, that's the one that we're using, and that's the one that we are assigning to the to-do item. And finally, we have to save the context, context.save. And context.save, when you call that, it is a throwable function, so we have to make sure that we are wrapping it with try catch. So let's go ahead and wrap this. And whenever the error comes, we're just going to print the error on the console and nothing more. So this is our save to do item. Nice and simple. Once again, and I have to repeat it again and again, but all of this stuff like saving, updating, even fetching, and even business logic, in the later tutorials, in the later lectures, I'll show you a different way of doing that. But since this is kind of like the start of the course, I just want to show you that how you can quickly create a to-do list application where you are writing these functions in the view itself, which is perfectly fine. And remember that in the Swift UI framework, the view itself is the view model. So we're not really be creating any view models to accommodate anything. If you create view model, that's just extra work for no good. And I'll have some articles that you can read, but you already have probably read those articles, and we are not going to be using any view models per se to create our applications. All right. Okay. So we have that is working correctly. That's fine. Now let's go ahead, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a spacer over here so everything is kind of like pushed up. There we go. In the view, in the Xcode preview, is going to move up. And I'm also going to add a navigation stack. Although we're not really performing any navigation, I'm just going to add a navigation stack so that I can get that toolbar working. All right. So once we have this, after the padding, I can go ahead and say navigation title and whatever navigation title that you want. I'm just going to add to do, but you can use anything you want. You can see the Xcode preview is kind of slow right now, but hopefully it's going to catch up. So here we go. We have our to-do item that is fine. And so this part is important because over here we are injecting it for working with Xcode previews. But when you're actually running your app on the device or the simulator, then this code gets fired. This is in the app file itself, right? So we have to make sure that we are adding or injecting the environment values over here also. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a provider, which is a core data provider. There we go. Now, since I'm not really passing anything in core data provider, this means that this will create the persistent storage, meaning it's not going to store in the memory. You can see that it does allow me to pass in memory, but in memory is false by default. So we're not really going to be putting it in memory. We're just going to be saving it in the actual database. Next, I can go ahead and put environment object, or environment itself, sorry, not the environment object, but the environment value for the manage object context, and we can say provider.view context. So that is great. And we will go ahead and also wrap this with a navigation stack so we have access to that toolbar, navigation bar on the top, even though we're not really performing any navigation. Okay, so this is great. What next we want to do is, even if we save right now, I mean, I can type anything over here. Let's see, sometimes it doesn't allow you to type anything. You can see, and you can fix that. Sometimes you can fix that by just changing the simulator, or sometimes it just doesn't work. Xcode previews, see, now I can type it over here. So let's say if I say clean, oh, I still cannot type anything over here. So that's kind of bad, right? And hopefully we'll fix that. Not that one. Let's see. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Okay, now I can type it over there. Kind of funny. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, clean car. Now, even if I press enter over here, it doesn't really do anything. We will have to fix that part. The another part that we need to do is, after saving it, after this operation, we can probably go ahead and set the title to empty string so that the title is gone. All right, so again, if I go and I type something over here, it's loading. You can see Xcode previews, it's just getting slower and slower. But if we type something over here in this list, let's say clean car, now it disappears when I press enter after saving it. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is we want to fetch the data, and we also want to display the data. And keep in mind that when we are using Xcode previews, we may actually see some default data printed out. So all of this default data will be printed out for you. All right, so we will have 10 items saying to do item 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9, 10. So don't get scared with that. Just remember, this is only for the preview, not for your actual application. Okay, so let's go to the next lecture and find out how we can perform fetching of the data. Now let's go ahead and talk about how we can perform a fetch request so we can get all the to-do items and then we can display it in a list. Now, one of the things that I always advocate when you're using with either Swift data or core data is try to use the property wrappers that are provided to you by the framework itself. And one of those property wrappers when you're working with core data is called fetch request. And the reason that I always encourage you to use fetch request property wrappers is because it's not only for fetching, it's also for tracking. And if you are trying to do something with the CloudKit or iCloud syncing, then fetch request is also going to be really handy. I've seen a lot of developers, they are creating their own data access layers, and then they have to keep tracking themselves manually that something has changed. So they do that by passing in different flags that, oh, this has changed, now refresh the parent. It's a mess. You don't want to do that. Just try to keep it simple, try to use the property wrappers that are provided to you. Now keep in mind that when we talk about these property wrappers like fetch request and all that, they only work in the view. But I will show you later in a different different project that you can enclose them in your model files. So you can reuse them later on, or if you don't want to put it in the view, you can. I mean, the creation of the fetch request can be moved somewhere else. So I'm going to use the fetch request property wrapper, and we need to pass in the sort descriptors if we are sorting. So we're not really sorting. I'm just going to pass in an empty array. And now I can go ahead and say private var to do items. And what this fetch request is going to give us will be the fetch results. So fetch results, you can iterate through them and you can display them. So fetch results, and we have to specify over here that these fetch results are of type to do item, which is one of our classes. Next thing that we want to do is we just want to display them. All right. So multiple ways of displaying them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a list. And since the items can be pending as well as items can be completed, I'm going to create a section. And inside that section, I can go ahead and loop through the to-do items. Now, keeping in mind that these to-do items, currently, obviously, they will all be pending because none of them is completed, but we will have to fix that also later on. So to-do item in, and then we can simply display the to-do item. So to-do item dot text, or title in that case. So this is going to, you can see now it's showing us all the to-do items, and these are all the default to-do items. Remember, since we're using the preview right over here, we entered 10 to-do items. So you're always going to have those to-do items because they are coming from the preview in-memory database. Now for our list, I don't really want the list style to be that. I'm just going to go ahead and change this to plain list style. There we go, much better. And another thing that we want to do is we have pending over here, right? We also want to change that, meaning there should be some sort of a checkbox right next to it. So we can maybe check mark it, and then eventually this can move to the pending list. So check mark and all those things we're going to talk about later. But right now we only have the pending section. What about the completed section? So let's go ahead and work on that also. So inside the list, we can create another section. So section, this will be completed. And for now, the completed section, I'm just going to go ahead and do the same exact thing. So you can see for the completed section, we have the same thing. Now, the to-do items over here for the pending and the completed, they represent all the to-do items in your database, like this. What we want to do is those to-do items, some of them might be pending, some of them eventually might be completed. So we want to separate them out. We want a different array for pending items and a different array for completed items. So what we can do is we can create a property called pending task items, which is going to return you a to-do item. And we can go ahead, go to the to-do items.filter and simply perform this filter. So if they are completed, so is completed, then we are going to return those items. Or actually, sorry, not completed, right? Because these are pending items, so they are supposed to be not completed. And for completed items, well, the is completed property will have to be true. So let's call them completed task items or completed to-do items. That will be a little bit much better because we are using to-do item everywhere. So let's make sure that we are making everything correct over here, to-do item, and in this case, it will be completed. So we have created two different private properties inside the content view. One is for the pending to-do item, one is for the completed to-do items. And for the first one, for the pending, we can change that to say pending to-do items. And the second one, we can change that to completed to-do items. Now, keep in mind that right now, it's not going to really make any difference because all of them are pending, right? Now, we can always go back to our core data provider, and you can see that we're not setting this particular property, like the to-do item is completed is always going to be false because the default value is false. But maybe we can, maybe we can fix that. Maybe we can select even odd number of items, or we can do something that can change the is completed property. So let's say that if I say if the index is completely divisible by 2 is 0, then for the even number, is completed item is true, or else it's false. So this means that some of the items will have is completed true, and some items will have is completed to be false. Now let's go back to the content view, and you should be able to see some completed items and some pending items. There we go. You can see some pending items and some completed items. All right. Now the next part that we want to do is we want to add a checkbox with each of these things so that we can mark them as completed. Once we check the checkbox, that particular item is going to move to the completed. We also want to edit these items. Maybe I edit this item and maybe I want to change this. Maybe I want to say this is mow the lawn or feed the cat. I also want to add items. So I can go ahead and say clean the car. And there we go. You can see that clean the car is added. So all of this is working fine. Now, obviously, if I go ahead and refresh my preview, the car is going to be gone because that was in memory and now it's gone. So we need to work on a couple of different things. Marking items to be correct, or marking items to be completed or not. So that's the next thing that we want to work on. Now let's go ahead and work on marking your items to be complete or incomplete, meaning that we need to add our checkboxes with each of these to-do items. When we check mark any of these to-do items, they will move to the completed, but the completed item will also have a checkbox, and we can uncheck those and they can move back to the pending. So that's what we're trying to build now. The first thing we should do at this point is look at the text that we're displaying. This is our actual cell that is being displayed in our pending items as well as our completed items. So maybe it's a good idea to separate it out into a different view. Now you can create a separate file for a different view. For this view, that's perfectly fine. I'm just going to use the same file. So to do cell view, which is a view, and this means that we need to implement the body. Great. And for now, I'm just going to start with to do cell view. Like the body is simply saying to do cell view, and that's it. The to do cell view will be dependent on the to do item. So you need to pass in the to do item for this to work. And we will also have a closure that we're firing, which is going to be called on changed. So whenever we change something, we're going to fire that closure and we're going to pass in the to do item so that the caller can process it. Now in the body, we need to create some sort of look and feel for our to do cell view. So for the edge stack, I'm just going to go ahead and use image. So let's go ahead and use the image. There we go. Now one of the things about this image is it's using the system name, and if the to-do item is completed, then it's going to be using the checkmark.square image, or else it's just going to use a square. So let's go ahead and try to use that so you'll get a better idea. So over here in the pending items, I'm just going to go ahead and remove that and say to-do cell view, and we can pass in the to-do item. We already have the to-do item, so that's not a big deal. We can simply pass in. And for the change part, we're just gonna do it later. All right. Okay, so this is what it looks like right now. You can see that we got our checkboxes, but what about the actual text, right? So let's go ahead and add the text also. And the text will be to do item dot title. So now this is going to display the text. All right, so we got the text also. And we can use the same exact approach for our completed items. So let's go ahead and grab that also for the completed items. Great. So you can see the completed items are already with the check mark, which is saying that they are already completed. And that is because if the to-do item is completed, then we are using a different image, which is a square with a check mark in it. And if those items are not completed, then we simply use a square image. Okay, so this is great. Now, we should be able to tap on the image itself to make it completed or not completed. So I can say on tap gesture and to do item dot is completed, and we're going to say just reverse that. So to do item dot is completed. So whatever is a reverse, we're just going to reverse it. Now you can use a toggle if you want. That's perfectly fine. I like using this. It's a little bit more clear to me, but just assigning it, you can use toggle if you want. And then we're going to fire the function, the closure on change, passing in the updated to do item. All right. So this is going to make sure that we are performing this. I mean, we are changing it, and then we are calling on change over here. Now, when you receive it, which is this part and this part, this is where you're actually getting those things, right? This is actually where you're getting the updated to-do item. So over here, what we can do is we can create a function, like instead of doing all of this stuff that we're doing, like handling the closure, let's remove that part for now, this part. And we can say on change, just go ahead and fire a function called update to do item. And this function doesn't really exist right now, but we will create that. On change, we will call update to do item. Again, we need to implement that function. And this particular function that we need to implement should have the same exact signature as the on change closure. So this means that update to do item will be a function that takes in a to do item and returns nothing. So we'll go and update or create this function. Again, I'm creating this function inside the view. Eventually, I'll show you in a very different project that how we can do this in a different way where we don't have this stuff in the view. We will move it out from the view and we'll put it in our model files. All right, there we go, update to do item. Now the item is already up to date. It just needs to be saved. So this means that right over here, we can call context.save. And if there is any error, any exception, we can go ahead and display that exception. Okay. Okay. Let's go ahead and give it a try. So pending item, you can see that I'm going to click on this person right there, which is to do item 1. I'm just going to check mark it. And the to do item 1 is now in our completed. Now in our completed, I can also go and uncheck that. When I uncheck that, it goes back there, right? So you can see that I can mark all of these items to be completed, and now the pending is nothing there. And now I can also uncheck them so that they go back to pending. So this part is now looks like it's working correctly. All right. So this is great. The next thing that we want to work on is actual editing of the item. I mean, this is just marking the item between complete and incomplete. But what if I want to edit this to do item 4 or any of these items? I just want to say this is not to do item 4. I just want to type it out. This is clean the car or feed the rabbit or feed the cat. So how do I do that? So in the next lecture, we'll be learning about how to perform in-place editing inside our list. Now the next thing that we want to work on is we want to allow the user to change the title, the text of the to-do item. Now, right now I can't really do anything because the to-do item is a label, which is a text label right there. So text label itself is not editable. We can't really do anything about that. But we should be able to use a text field instead of a text label. Now, one of the things that we can do is, first of all, if you have done or if you have marked the item completed, then you can't really edit the item. So, I mean, you can mark it incomplete and then edit it, but once it is there, once it is in the completed, you can't really do that. We will not allow you to do that stuff. And that's just a business requirement. Maybe you don't have that requirement, and that's perfectly fine. So how do we do this? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check if the to-do item is completed, then I can go ahead and say over here that we're just going to display a text field and that's it. Okay. But if it's not, meaning if it's not completed and it's in a pending state, then we can try to use text fields. Now I'm going to use the text field. Not really going to assign anything over here for the title, but for the text, I can try to bind it to something else. So I can try to bind it to to-do item dot title. But the to-do item dot title, it's not going to work. And the reason is that the to-do item dot title is a string, and what you're looking for is a binding. So that's not going to work. So one of the ways that you can do that is to create the binding yourself on the fly. So we can create a binding. We can provide a getter and the setter for the binding. For the getter, we're just going to go ahead and say to do item dot title, and we're just going to get the value from the binding, which is either going to be title or empty. And for the new value, meaning whatever the value that you're going to get, we are going to simply assign it to the to-do item dot title, and we're going to assign that value. So this is going to create a binding for us. Okay. And when we're done, meaning on submit, we will call on changed and simply pass in the to-do item, keeping in mind that the to-do item is already been updated, because whenever you're typing in the text field, the set binding is actually updating with new value. Okay, so now let's go ahead and give it a try. If I go over here, now you can already see that I can edit this, the to-do item number 3. Let's go and say clean car. And there we go. So now we have clean car that has been added. Now, when we call on change over here, it's simply going to call the update to do item, which is going to save the context. So all of those values will be persisted in the database correctly. If I mark this item clean car as completed, you can see that the item goes to the completed section. And if I try to edit this item, it doesn't work, because now we're not displaying a text field, we are displaying a text, just the label. So this is going to not allow us to update that. Now this is our business requirement. If you don't have that requirement, if you want to allow the user to edit the title of your to-do item, even though that item is in the completed section, then just don't use this. I mean, you don't really need any of that stuff. Just use a text field and that will work. All right. So this is done. This looks good. Now the next things that we want to try out will be to make sure that if there are absolutely no items in there, then it shouldn't just say empty. We should probably do something about it. We should say no pending items or something like that instead of showing them as empty. So let's go ahead and work on that in the next lecture. Now, one of the things that you may have noted is if we don't have pending items, or the same goes for the completed items, then it shows an empty space over here. Maybe we can replace that and we can display some sort of a text. And one of the things that was introduced in iOS 17 is the content unavailable view. So I can go over here and say if the pending items is empty, meaning there are no pending items, then we can go ahead and display content unavailable view. And you can see that content unavailable view comes with many different variations. So I'm just going to say no items found or no task items found, whatever you want to say, and then some sort of an image or a system image. Else, in those cases, when you do have pending items, then we can perform the for each and we can display all of that stuff. So let's go ahead and see how that works. Currently, we do have pending items, so that's why the content unavailable view is not being displayed. So as I check mark these things, there we go. No items found. Great, right? And we can use the same exact approach for completed items. If completed items is empty, then we can simply do the same exact thing. Else, we can do the for each. So this means that if we remove the item from the completed and now all the items are marked with pending, then no items are found. If we do the reverse, meaning if we try to set all the items to be completed, then no items found. So this control, this new view that is added is definitely very helpful, and it does come with a lot more variations if you want to use it. So content unavailable view. And you can see their documentation also. So you can see that this is available. Like if you want to go and check it out, you can see that it is for iOS 17. So if you are not using iOS 17, then you will have to use your own custom view, like a simple text view will be enough, but or a label. You can use a label also. So those choices are still available to you. All right. Now, one of the other things that we want to work on is deleting. Right now, from the pending or the completed items, we are not able to delete any of these items. So in the next lecture, let's go ahead and find out that how we can delete our to-do items. Now let's go ahead and talk about deleting. Now we have to be really careful with deleting, and the reason is because we're using two different collections. So pending to-do items and completed to-do items. Now they contain objects that are part of the real collection or the main collection, and they are classes, so they're by reference. So that's always good. So you can see over here in the pending to-do items, we are returning a brand new array by using filter, but keeping in mind that that array contains items that are pointing to the to-do items. I mean, so the items will still be by reference. It's not like the items are completely different or they're copied over, they're just by reference. Okay. So how do we do that? How do we delete this? So one of the things that we want to do, and by the way, you can check, like if I command click on to do item, you can see that this is a reference item, by the way, right? This is a class. Okay, let's go back. So what we want to do is we want to slide from right to left to delete our cell. So right now, if I slide, it doesn't really do anything. So on the for each, we can perform on delete. And on delete is going to give you index set. So this is like if you have multiple items, because you can iterate through index set. So I can go ahead and say index set dot for each, and we will get the index. We will get the to-do item from that index, which will be from not from to-do item, but from pending to-do items. And the reason that we are trying to get it from the pending to-do items is because this is a list, or this particular section is displaying items from the pending to-do items. I mean, if we are trying to get access from the actual to-do items, like to-do items over here, then it's not really going to work because it will end up deleting the wrong item because of the indexes. So we have to make sure that we are referring the index of the pending items. So that's why we are getting the items, or getting the item that we want to delete from pending to-do items. Now, once we get the item, the last thing that you want to do is to delete it. Again, I'm just going to go ahead and implement the function over here, but as I have been repeating it multiple times, we will move this code out on a different example, different project. I just want to show you that how you can do it in the view right now, so you can see something working really quickly. Instead of creating all those different layers and whatnot, we're just trying to get it to work. So context.delete, and we can delete an object, which is to do item. Now, just by calling the delete doesn't really delete the item. It is marked for deletion in the context. So if you do want to delete the item, you still have to say context.save, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap this. So save is going to persist the changes from the context, whatever the changes are, to the persistent store. In this case, the persistent store is in memory, so it will be reflected over there. So once we get the item, we can go ahead over here and we can delete it. So I can call delete item and passing in the item. And we can use the same exact kind of code somewhere else. So we can use it right here also. But in this case, it will be completed to do items. So that's the only difference. Now let's go ahead and try it out. I'm going to try to delete that item number 1. You can see the delete button is now appearing. And you can see that the to-do item 1 is now gone. To-do item 3 is gone. To-do item 5. So the index looks like it's working correctly because we are removing it from the correct list. And there we go. To-do item 2 is gone. Now, all of these items are gone. They're in memory. So this means that if I refresh, if I just press space somewhere, and all of these items come back because they were in memory. So if you want to try it out completely in real, let's go ahead and run this. And now when it's running in the simulator, we are not going to be using in-memory store. We'll be using the SQLite database. And once we are using that, then you should be able to see that the items are being deleted successfully. And once you load the app again, you won't see the items. So let's go ahead and wait for the simulator to load, and then we can see how our app works when it is running on a simulator or the real device. Now let's go ahead and talk about deleting. Now we have to be really careful with deleting, and the reason is because we're using two different collections. So pending to-do items and completed to-do items. Now they contain objects that are part of the real collection or the main collection, and they are classes, so they're by reference. So that's always good. So you can see over here in the pending to-do items, we are returning a brand new array by using filter, but keeping in mind that that array contains items that are pointing to the to-do items. So the items will still be by reference. It's not like the items are completely different or they're copied over, they're just by reference. Okay. So how do we do that? How do we delete this? So one of the things that we want to do, and by the way, you can check, like if I command click on to do item, you can see that this is a reference item, by the way, right? This is a class. Okay, let's go back. So what we want to do is we want to slide from right to left to delete our cell. So right now, if I slide, it doesn't really do anything. So on the for each, we can perform on delete. And on delete is going to give you index set. So this is like if you have multiple items, because you can iterate through index set. So I can go ahead and say index set dot for each, and we will get the index. We will get the to-do item from that index, which will be from, not from to-do item, but from pending to-do items. And the reason that we are trying to get it from the pending to-do items is because this is a list, or this particular section is displaying items from the pending to-do items. If we are trying to get access from the actual to-do items, like to-do items over here, then it's not really going to work because it will end up deleting the wrong item because of the indexes. So we have to make sure that we are referring the index of the pending items. So that's why we are getting the items, or getting the item that we want to delete from pending to-do items. Now, once we get the item, the last thing that you want to do is to delete it. Again, I'm just going to go ahead and implement the function over here, but as I have been repeating it multiple times, we will move this code out on a different example, different project. I just want to show you that how you can do it in the view right now, so you can see something working really quickly. Instead of creating all those different layers and whatnot, we're just trying to get it to work. So context.delete, and we can delete an object which is to do item. Now, just by calling the delete doesn't really delete the item. It is marked for deletion in the context. So if you do want to delete the item, you still have to say context.save, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap this. So save is going to persist the changes from the context, whatever the changes are, to the persistent store. In this case, the persistent store is in memory, so it will be reflected over there. So once we get the item, we can go ahead over here and we can delete it. So I can call delete item and passing in the item. And we can use the same exact kind of code somewhere else. So we can use it right here also. But in this case, it will be completed to do items. So that's the only difference. Now let's go ahead and try it out. I'm going to try to delete that item number 1. You can see the delete button is now appearing. And you can see that the to do item 1 is now gone. To do item 3 is gone. To do item 5. So the index looks like it's working correctly because we are removing it from the correct list. And there we go. To do item 2 is gone. Now, all of these items are gone. They're in memory. So this means that if I refresh, if I just press space somewhere and all of these items come back because they were in memory. So if you want to try it out completely in real, let's go ahead and run this. And now when it's running in the simulator, we are not going to be using in-memory store. We'll be using the SQLite database. And once we are using that, then you should be able to see that the items are being deleted successfully. And once you load the app again, you won't see the items. So let's go ahead and wait for the simulator to load, and then we can see how our app works when it is running on a simulator or the real device.